Hello friends. Welcome to my new video. In this video you will listen 7th lesson why we travel. This lesson is about traveling. It has many new words. Listen their pronunciation properly. Double tap on the screen and share with your friends. Thank you.
Why we travel. We travel, initially, to lose ourselves, and we travel, next, to find ourselves. We travel to open our hearts and eyes and learn more about the world than our newspapers will accommodate. We travel to bring what little we can, in our ignorance and knowledge, to those parts of the globe whose riches are differently dispersed. And we travel, in essence, to become young fools again, to slow time down and get taken in, and fall in love once more. The beauty of this whole process was best described, perhaps, before people even took to frequent flying, by George Santayana in his lapidary essay, The Philosophy of Travel. We need sometimes, the Harvard philosopher wrote, to escape into open solitudes, into aimlessness, into the moral holiday of running some pure hazard, in order to sharpen the edge of life, to taste hardship, and to be compelled to work desperately for a moment at no matter what. Few of us ever forget the connection between travel and travail. Travel in that sense guides us toward a better balance of wisdom and compassion, of seeing the world clearly, and yet feeling it truly. For seeing without feeling can obviously be uncaring, while feeling without seeing can be blind. Yet for me the first great joy of traveling is simply the luxury of leaving all my beliefs and certainties at home, and seeing everything I thought I knew in a different light, and from a crooked angle. Though it's fashionable nowadays to draw a distinction between the tourist and the traveler, perhaps the real distinction lies between those who leave their assumptions at home, and those who don't. Among those who don't, a tourist is just someone who complains, nothing here is the way it is at home, while a traveler is one who grumbles, everything here is the same as it is in Cairo, or Cuzco or Kathmandu. It's all very much the same. But for the rest of us, the sovereign freedom of traveling comes from the fact that it whirls you around and turns you upside down, and stands everything you took for granted on its head. If a diploma can famously be a passport can be a diploma. And the first lesson we learn on the road, whether we like it or not, is how provisional and provincial are the things we imagine to be universal. We travel, then, in part just to shake up our complacencies by seeing all the moral and political urgencies, the life and death dilemmas, that we seldom have to face at home. And we travel to fill in the gaps left by tomorrow's headlines. When you drive down the streets of Port-au-Prince, for example, where there is almost no paving, your notions of the internet and a one world order grow usefully revised. Travel is the best way we have of rescuing the humanity of places, and saving them from abstraction and ideology. And in the process, we also get saved from abstraction ourselves, and come to see how much we can bring to the places we visit, and how much we can become a kind of carrier pigeon, an anti-federal express, if you like, in transporting back and forth what every culture needs. I find that I always take Michael Jordan posters to Kyoto, and bring woven ikebana baskets back to California. But more significantly, we carry values and beliefs and news to the places we go, and in many parts of the world, we become walking video screens and living newspapers, the only channels that can take people out of the censored limits of their homelands. In closed or impoverished places, like Pagan or Lhasa or Havana, we are the eyes and ears of the people we meet, their only contact with the world outside, and, very often, the closest, quite literally, they will ever come to Michael Jackson or Bill Clinton. Not the least of the challenges of travel, therefore, is learning how to import and export dreams with tenderness.
By now all of us have heard the old Proust line about how the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new places, but in seeing with new eyes. Yet one of the subtler beauties of travel is that it enables you to bring new eyes to the people you encounter. Thus, even as holidays help you appreciate your own home, or no least by seeing it through a distant admirer's eyes, they help you bring newly appreciative distant eyes to the places you visit. You can teach them what they have to celebrate as much as you celebrate what they have to teach. This, I think, is how tourism, which so obviously destroys cultures, can also resuscitate or revive them, how it has created new traditional dances in Bali, and caused craftsmen in India to pay new attention to their works. Thus travel spins us round in two ways at once. It shows us the sights and values and issues that we might ordinarily ignore. But it also, and more deeply, shows us all the parts of ourselves that might otherwise grow rusty. For in travelling to a truly foreign place, we inevitably travel to moods and states of mind and hidden inward passages that we'd otherwise seldom have cause to visit. On the most basic level, when I'm in Tibet, though not a real Buddhist, I spend days on end in temples, listening to the chants of sutras. I go to Iceland to visit the lunar spaces within me, and, in the uncanny quietude and emptiness of that vast and treeless world, to tap parts of myself generally obscured by chatter and routine. We travel, then, in search of both self and anonymity, and, of course, in finding the one we apprehend the other. Abroad, we are wonderfully free of caste and job and standing. We are, as Hazlitt puts it, just the gentleman in the parlour, and people cannot put a name or tag to us. And precisely because we are clarified in this way, and freed of inessential labels, we have the opportunity to come into contact with more essential parts of ourselves. Abroad is the place where we stay up late, follow impulse and find ourselves as wide open as when we are in love. We live without a past or future, for a moment at least, and are ourselves up for grabs and open to interpretation. We even may become mysterious to others, at first, and sometimes to ourselves, and, as no less a dignitary than Oliver Cromwell once noted, a man never goes so far as when he doesn't know where he is going. There are, of course, great dangers to this, as to every kind of freedom, but the great promise of it is that, travelling, we're born again, and able to return at moments to a younger and a more open kind of self. Travelling is a way to reverse time, to a small extent, and make a day last a year, or at least 45 hours, and travelling is an easy way of surrounding ourselves, as in childhood, with what we cannot understand. Language facilitates this cracking open, for when we go to France, we often migrate to French, and the more childlike self, simple and polite, that speaking a foreign language induces. Even when I'm not speaking pidgin English in Hanoi, I'm simplified in a positive way, and concerned not with expressing myself, but simply making sense. So travel, for many of us, is a quest for not just the unknown, but the unknowing. I, at least, travel in search of an innocent I that can return me to a more innocent self. I tend to believe more abroad than I do at home. Which, though treacherous again, can at least help me, and since no one I meet can place me noon can fix me in my resume, I can remake myself for better, as well as, of course, for worse. In this way, travel can be a kind of monasticism on the move, on the road. We often live more simply, with no more possessions than we can carry, and surrendering ourselves to chance. This is what Camus meant when he said that what gives value to travel is fear-disruption, in other words, from circumstance, and all the habits behind which we hide. And that is why many of us travel not in search of answers, but of better questions. I, like many people, tend to ask questions of the places I visit, and relish most the ones that ask the most searching questions back of me. The ideal travel book, Christopher Isherwood once said, should be perhaps a little like a crime story in which you're in search of something. And it's the best kind of something, I would add, if it's one that you can never quite find. I remember, in fact, after my first trips to Southeast Asia, more than a decade ago, how I would come back to my apartment in New York, and lie in my bed, kept up by something more than jet lag, playing back, in my memory, over and over, all that I had experienced. And paging wistfully through my photographs and reading and rereading my diaries, as if to extract some mystery from them. Anyone witnessing this strange scene would have drawn the right conclusion: I was in love. When we go abroad is that we are objects of scrutiny as much as the people we scrutinize, and we are being consumed by the cultures we consume, as much on the road as when we are at home. At the very least, we are objects of speculation who can seem as exotic to the people around us as they do to us. All, in that sense, believe in being moved as one of the points of taking trips, and being transported by private as well as public means. All saw that ecstasy. Tells us that our highest moments come when we're not stationary, and that epiphany can follow movement as much as it precipitates it. When you go to a McDonald's outlet in Kyoto, you will find teriyaki McBurgers and bacon potato pies. The placemats offer maps of the great temples of the city, and the posters all around broadcast the wonders of San Francisco. And most crucial of all, the young people eating their Big Macs, with baseball caps worn backwards, and tight 501 jeans, are still utterly and inalienably Japanese in the way they move, they nod, they sip their oolong teas, and never to be mistaken for the patrons of a McDonald's outlet in Rio, Morocco or Managua. These days a whole new realm of exotica arises out of the way one culture colors and appropriates the products of another. The other factor complicating and exciting all of this is people, who are, more and more, themselves as many thuged and mongrel as cities like Sydney or Toronto or Hong Kong. I am, in many ways, an increasingly typical specimen, if only because I was born, as the son of Indian parents, in England, moved to America at 7, and cannot really call myself an Indian, an American or an Englishman. I was, in short, a traveller at birth, for whom even a visit to the candy store was a trip through a foreign world where no one I saw quite matched my parents' inheritance, or my own. Besides, even those who don't move around the world find the world moving more and more around them. Walk just 6 blocks, in Queens or Berkeley, and you're traveling through several cultures in as many minutes. Get into a cab outside the White House, and you're often in a piece of Addis Ababa. And technology, too, compounds this sense of availability, so that many people feel they can travel around the world without leaving the room through cyberspace or CD-ROMs, videos and virtual travel. There are many challenges in this, of course, in what it says about essential notions of family and community, and loyalty, and in the worry that air-conditioned, purely synthetic versions of places may replace the real thing, not to mention the fact that the world seems increasingly in flux, a moving target quicker than our notions of it. But there is, for the traveller at least, the sense that learning about home and learning about a foreign world can be one and the same thing. All of us feel this from the cradle, and know, in some sense, that all the significant movement we ever take is internal. We travel when we see a movie, strike up a new friendship, get held up. Novels are often journeys as much as travel books are fictions. And though this has been true since at least as long ago as Sir John Mandeville's colourful 14th century accounts of a Far East he'd never visited, it's an even more shadowy distinction now, as genre distinctions join other borders in collapsing. Travel, then, is a voyage into that famously subjective zone, the imagination, and what the traveller brings back is, and has to be, an ineffable compound of himself and the place, what's really there and what's only in him. And since travel is, in a sense, about the conspiracy of perception and imagination, the two great travel writers, for me, to whom I constantly return are Emerson and Thoreau. Both of them insist on the fact that reality is our creation, and that we invent the places we see as much as we do the books that we read. What we find outside ourselves has to be inside ourselves for us to find it. Or, as Sir Thomas Browne sagely put it, we carry within us the wonders we seek without us. There is Africa and her prodigies in us. So, if more and more of us have to carry our sense of home inside us, we also, Emerson and Thoreau remind us, have to carry with us our sense of destination. The most valuable Pacifics we explore will always be the vast expanses within us, and the most important northwest crossings the thresholds we cross in the heart. The virtue of finding a gilded pavilion in Kyoto is that it allows you to, and even as the world seems to grow more exhausted, our travels do not, and some of the finest travel books in recent years have been those that undertake a parallel journey, matching the physical steps of a pilgrimage with the metaphysical steps of a questioning, or chronicling a trip to the farthest reaches of human strangeness. The most distant shores, we are constantly reminded, lie within the person asleep at our side. So travel, at heart, is just a quick way to keeping our minds mobile and awake. As Santayana, the heir to Emerson and Thoreau with whom I began, wrote, there is wisdom in turning as often as possible from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It keeps the mind nimble, it kills prejudice, and it fosters humor. Romantic poets inaugurated an era of travel because they were the great apostles of open eyes. Buddhist monks are often vagabonds, in part because they believe in wakefulness. And if travel is like love, it is, in the end, mostly because it's a heightened state of awareness, in which we are mindful, receptive, and dim by familiarity and ready to be transformed. That is why the best trips, like the best love affairs, never really end. Siddhartha Ravanya,